Sam woke up to the sound of birds outside his window. The morning sun touched the old wooden beams of the house and reminded him of how long the ranch had stood strong. The ranch had been in his family for more than 100 years. His great-grandfather had built the first part of it with his own hands, and every generation since then had cared for it. Sam often thought of it not only as land and buildings but as a living memory of his family. That morning felt calm at first. The smell of hay drifted in from the barn, and the horses moved gently in their stalls. Sam walked out with his hat on and boots tied, ready to start another day of work. He checked the fences, carried water for the animals, and thought about fixing the roof of the small shed near the backfield. Everything seemed as it always had been. But just as he returned to the front gate, he noticed something that made him stop. There was a letter taped to the gate. The paper flapped a little in the breeze, and the writing on the front was bold and official looking. Sam pulled it off carefully, wondering who would leave a message in such a strange way. He opened the envelope and began to read. The letter said that the local homeowners association now owned the ranch. It claimed that Sam had to move out within 30 days or he would face eviction. The words felt heavy and unbelievable. Sam read the letter again, then a third time, trying to understand how such a thing could be true. He had never sold the ranch. He had never signed anything. His family had always been careful to keep the records safe. How could anyone claim to own what had belonged to his family for more than a century? For a moment, Sam just stood there in silence. The letter shook him, but it also made him angry in a quiet way. He folded the paper and slipped it into his pocket, then walked back toward the house. His mind filled with questions. Who were these people from the association? Why did they think they could take his land? What kind of mistake or trick was happening here inside the house? Sam placed the letter on the kitchen table. He sat down and stared at it, the words still echoing in his mind. The ranch was more than just property. It carried his childhood memories, his father's hard work, his grandfather's stories, and the spirit of his great-grandfather who had built it from nothing. Sam thought of the oak tree near the barn where his father had taught him how to ride a horse. He thought of the long evenings when his family would sit on the porch and talk about the day's work. None of that could be replaced, and none of it could be handed over to strangers who had no history with the land. The rest of the day passed slowly. Sam tried to keep working, but every task felt heavy. He fed the cattle and fixed a broken fence post, but his thoughts kept returning to the letter. Each time he remembered the words, he felt the same mix of disbelief and determination. Something was wrong, and he knew he had to find out what it was. Later in the evening, Sam walked to the edge of the property where the fields stretched out wide. The sunset painted the sky in soft colors. He thought of how many times his ancestors had stood in the same place, looking at the same land. They had built their lives here, and so had he. He clenched his fists gently and told himself that no letter could erase more than a century of family history. That night, Sam placed the letter in a drawer beside the original deeds and documents of the ranch. He kept them in a wooden box his grandfather had given him. The papers inside proved the ownership of the land, signed and sealed many years ago. Sam felt a small sense of calm knowing that the truth was on his side. Still, he could not ignore the fact that someone was trying to challenge him. The next morning, Sam woke early. The air was cool, and a thin mist hung over the fields. He made coffee, sat by the window, and studied the letter once more. He noticed the official stamp of the association, along with a set of contact numbers at the bottom. The words were written in a confident tone, as if the writers believed they had complete control. Sam shook his head slowly. Whoever wrote this did not understand the strength of his connection to the ranch. After finishing his coffee, Sam decided that he would not ignore the matter. He needed to know what was behind it. He needed to face whoever thought they could take his land. With that thought, he folded the letter carefully, placed it in his jacket pocket, and prepared himself for what was to come. As he walked back outside, the ranch seemed even more important than before. The barn, the fields, the fences, and even the old windmill all looked like symbols of his family's story. Sam felt a strong responsibility rise inside him. He was not only protecting his home but also protecting the memory of generations before him. The sun rose higher, casting light over the wide open land. Sam mounted his horse and rode across the property, looking at every corner as if to remind himself of what he was defending. He thought of his great-grandfather clearing the land with only simple tools. He thought of his grandfather planting trees that still stood tall today. He thought of his father repairing the barn year after year, never letting it fall. Sam realized that his role was now clear. He had to stand firm against anyone who tried to erase that legacy. By the time he returned to the house, Sam had made up his mind. The letter was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning. Whatever challenge the association brought, he would be ready. He looked at the ranch one more time, the place he called home, and whispered to himself that it was worth fighting for. And so the first step in this unexpected battle had been taken. The letter was delivered, the threat was made, but Sam was prepared to answer it with truth and courage. The ranch had stood for 120 years, and Sam would make sure it stood for 100 more. The morning after Sam made his decision to defend the ranch, he felt more alert than usual. The air was crisp, and the sounds of the ranch carried clearly across the land. The horses moved in the stable, the chickens clucked near the barn, and the windmill creaked as it turned slowly in the breeze. Everything around him reminded him of home and gave him strength. Sam carried water to the animals, mended another fence post, and checked the small garden behind the house. He wanted to keep his mind busy, but the thought of the letter kept returning. Each time it did, his determination grew stronger. He had no intention of leaving. The ranch belonged to him, and he was ready to defend it. By midday, Sam was walking toward the house when he saw a vehicle pulling up near the front gate. A shiny black car stopped on the dirt road, and 3 people stepped out. They wore neat suits, carried folders, and looked around the ranch as though they were already judging it. Sam wiped his hands on his jeans and walked calmly toward them. One of the visitors, a tall man with gray hair, spoke first. His voice was smooth but carried a tone of authority. He introduced himself as the head of the local homeowners association. Beside him stood a younger man with a clipboard and a woman holding a thick folder of documents. They smiled politely, but Sam could see their confidence. They believed they had power here. The gray-haired man explained why they had come. According to their records, the association had purchased the ranch as part of a community expansion plan. He said the land was now under their control, and Sam was expected to vacate. He spoke as though the matter was already decided. Sam listened carefully but did not interrupt. When the man finished, Sam spoke firmly. He told them that the ranch had been in his family for 120 years and that no one had the right to take it. He explained that he had original documents proving ownership. His voice was calm, but his words carried weight. The younger man with the clipboard chuckled lightly and said the documents were old and no longer mattered. The woman with the folder added that new papers had already been filed with the county. She opened her folder and held out a copy of what looked like a property transfer form. Sam glanced at it and quickly noticed that it had strange details. The date looked recent, the signature line was unclear, and the description of the property was not written the way his deed described it. Sam shook his head and told them he had never signed anything like that. The gray-haired man gave a small smile and said it would be easier if Sam cooperated peacefully. He suggested that Sam could avoid trouble by handing over the keys and moving out quietly. Sam stood tall and looked directly at them. He said in a steady voice that he was not leaving and that no one could erase his family's history with false paperwork. He reminded them that he had the original deed signed by his great-grandfather and confirmed by every generation after him. The three visitors exchanged looks, and the confident smiles faded just a little. The younger man tried once more, saying they had lawyers ready to act if Sam refused. But Sam repeated that the land was his and that any attempt to remove him would face the truth in court. He pointed toward the barn, the fields, and the house, saying that everything they saw was built and cared for by his family, not by an association that had never set foot there before. For a moment, there was silence. The gray-haired man closed his folder and told Sam they would return soon. He warned Sam that resisting would not stop the process. Then the three of them walked back to their car and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust on the road behind them. Sam stood at the gate for a long time, watching the dust settle. His heart was steady, but his thoughts raced. He had faced them calmly, but he knew this was only the beginning. Their words showed that they were serious, and their papers, even if false, could cause trouble if no one challenged them. That evening, Sam sat on the porch with the old wooden box of documents on his lap. He opened it carefully and pulled out the original deed, its paper yellow with age but still clear. His great-grandfather's signature stood at the bottom, strong and proud. Next to it were later confirmations signed by county officials across the decades. Sam traced the letters with his finger and felt the strength of his family in every mark. He decided he needed to gather more proof. The deed alone was strong, but he wanted to check county records to confirm the history of the property. If the association had filed false documents, the truth would show in the archives. The next morning, Sam saddled his horse and rode into town. The county office was a simple building with tall shelves full of files and cabinets. He explained to the clerk what he needed, and together they searched through records of property ownership. Sam's heart pounded as he read each document. Finally, he found what he was looking for. The ranch had been listed under his family's name for over a century without a single change. The only new file was the one the association had submitted just a few months ago. As Sam read it carefully, he noticed clear mistakes. The form did not have his name, and the supposed seller's signature did not match anything. The dates also overlapped in ways that made no sense. Sam realized then that the association's claim was built on weak and suspicious documents. He thanked the clerk, made copies of the important papers, and placed them in his bag. On his way back home, he felt more confident. The truth was on his side, and now he had proof to challenge them. When he returned to the ranch, the evening sun was setting behind the hills. The light spread across the fields, making the land glow with warmth. Sam stood at the edge of the porch, holding the documents tightly. He thought about the visit earlier that day, the confident voices of the association, and the fear they had tried to plant in him. But now, with the evidence in hand, Sam felt stronger. The fight was not over. In fact, it had only just begun. But Sam knew one thing with certainty. The ranch was his, and no false claim could change that truth. The next morning, Sam woke up before sunrise. The sky was still dark, but his thoughts had been restless all night. He kept thinking about the false papers the association had shown him and the copies he had collected from the county office. He knew something was wrong, but he needed more than suspicion. He needed clear proof that the association was trying to cheat him. He put on his boots, stepped outside, and breathed in the cool air. The ranch stretched wide around him, quiet and calm. For a moment, he wished life could return to how it had been before the letter. But he also knew that challenges had to be faced. His great-grandfather had faced storms, his grandfather had faced hard winters, and his father had faced years of hard labor. Now it was his turn to face something different. This was not a storm of nature but a storm of papers and claims. Sam ate a quick breakfast, then placed the old deed and the new copies in his bag. He decided to spend the day in town at the library and the county office. He wanted to look deeper into the records. If the association had filed false documents, maybe there were other signs of their actions. The library was quiet when he arrived. Rows of books lined the walls, and a few people sat reading at tables. Sam greeted the librarian, who knew him well, and explained that he needed to search for information on the history of his land. The librarian smiled kindly and guided him to a section where old maps and property records were stored. Sam spent hours reading. He traced the history of the ranch from the very beginning. He found newspaper articles about his great-grandfather buying the land and building the first small house. He saw records of his grandfather expanding the barn and planting trees. Every piece of history he found made him feel stronger. The ranch had a story, and that story was written in ink, not just memory. But the most important discovery came when he compared old maps to new ones. The old maps clearly marked his land as private, separate from any community limits. Yet in one of the newest maps filed by the association, the ranch had been drawn inside a boundary that was not there before. It looked as if someone had redrawn the borders to include his land without permission. Sam felt a wave of certainty. The association had not only filed false papers but had also changed maps to make it look as though the ranch belonged under their control. He copied the maps and placed them carefully in his bag. By late afternoon, Sam walked back to the county office. He wanted to ask more questions, this time directly to one of the senior clerks. The clerk was a kind woman who had worked there for decades. When Sam explained his problem, she listened closely. She looked at the papers he had collected and frowned. She told Sam that real ownership transfers always required clear signatures, notarization, and proper records. She confirmed that the association's file looked suspicious. The missing signatures and odd dates were not small mistakes. They were signs of something dishonest. She advised Sam to gather everything he could and prepare to challenge the claim formally. Sam thanked her and left the office with a stronger heart. As he walked through town, the sun dipped low, painting the sky with shades of orange. He thought about the 3 representatives who had stood at his gate. Their voices had been confident, their faces certain, but now he could see the truth. Their confidence was built on paper that could not hold against real history. When he returned to the ranch, the evening shadows stretched across the fields. Sam placed the copies of maps and papers on the table. He spread them out carefully, placing the old deed in the center. Around it, he arranged the articles, the maps, and the county records. The more he looked, the clearer the picture became. The association had created a false trail to make it look like the ranch was theirs. But the real trail of history showed that it was his family's, and it always had been. That night, as he sat on the porch, Sam thought about what would come next. He knew the association would return. They had not spoken idle words when they promised to bring lawyers. But Sam was not afraid. He had proof now, and he had courage. He remembered how his father once told him that strength was not only in muscles but also in standing for what was right. The stars filled the sky above him, and the cool night wind moved through the trees. Sam felt calm. The ranch was not only protected by papers but also by the years of work his family had poured into it. No false claim could erase that. The next morning, Sam woke with new energy. He began the day as usual, feeding the animals and walking the fences, but his mind was focused on his next steps. He decided he needed to organize everything into a clear record, something he could present if the association tried again. He placed the deed, maps, and papers into separate folders. He even wrote notes on each one, explaining where he had found them and what they proved. While he worked, he thought about the people in town. Many neighbors had known his family for years. They had seen the ranch stand through generations. If needed, they could speak as witnesses. Sam made a mental note to visit some of them later. As the day passed, Sam also thought of the strange confidence the association had shown. Why would they believe he would hand over his land so easily? Perhaps they had succeeded with others before. Perhaps there were other families who had been pushed aside by the same tricks. The thought gave him more strength. If he stood firm, maybe he could stop them not only from taking his ranch but also from harming others. That evening, the sound of crickets filled the air. Sam sat again on the porch, looking over the wide land. The barn stood strong, the horses moved quietly, and the oak tree near the field swayed gently in the wind. He whispered to himself that the ranch was worth every effort. The truth was clear now. The association had drawn false lines and written false words, but truth could not be erased. Sam had found it, and he would hold it like a shield. The battle ahead would not be easy, but he was ready. The ranch had survived storms before, and now it would survive this storm too. And as the stars rose again, Sam promised himself that no matter what came next, he would protect the land, the memory, and the legacy of his family. The fight for truth had begun, and Sam was standing at the very center of it. The morning sun rose slowly over the ranch, painting the sky with soft gold. Sam stood near the porch with a folder in his hand. Inside it were the deed, the maps, and the records he had collected. For days he had studied them, arranging everything carefully. Each paper told the story of his family's ranch and showed that the association's claims were false. Sam felt ready, yet he knew that the real challenge was still ahead. He did not have to wait long. By late morning, a car appeared once again on the dirt road. This time it was not only one car but two. They stopped at the gate, and 5 people stepped out. Among them were the gray-haired man, the younger man with the clipboard, and the woman with the folder. 2 others wore the look of assistants, carrying briefcases. Sam walked calmly toward the gate. His boots pressed firmly against the earth, and his face carried no fear. The gray-haired man greeted him with the same smooth voice as before. He said they had returned to settle the matter once and for all. According to him, Sam's time was up, and he was expected to hand over the ranch. Sam did not answer right away. Instead, he invited them to the porch. The group followed, though with clear impatience. Once they sat down, Sam placed his folder on the table. He opened it slowly, his movements steady and deliberate. He began by showing the original deed. The paper was yellow with age but clear in every word. He pointed to his great-grandfather's signature and the seals of county officials. He explained how the land had passed from one generation to another without interruption. His voice was calm, but every sentence carried the weight of truth. The gray-haired man leaned back in his chair, trying to appear unimpressed. The younger man muttered that old papers could not stand against new filings. But Sam did not let their words shake him. He pulled out the copies of maps next. He showed the old maps that placed the ranch outside of community limits. Then he showed the new map drawn by the association, with the ranch suddenly placed inside a new boundary. Sam asked them directly why the borders had been changed without permission. The woman with the folder shifted uncomfortably. She tried to explain that boundaries often changed for development, but her voice lacked the certainty she had carried before. Sam pointed out the dates, proving that the change was made only months ago, long after his family had secured their rights. Finally, Sam placed the suspicious transfer form on the table. He compared it to the real deed, pointing out the missing signatures, the odd wording, and the mistakes in the property description. He explained how no legal transfer could ever be valid with such errors. His finger rested on the blank signature line, and his eyes met theirs firmly. For a moment, the porch was silent. The sound of birds filled the air, and the wind moved gently through the trees. The representatives looked at one another. Their confidence was beginning to crack. The younger man broke the silence. He raised his voice slightly and warned Sam that lawyers would bring action against him. He claimed that the association had powerful supporters and that Sam was only one man. But Sam answered with steady words. He said that truth was stronger than any false claim. He reminded them that forging or altering documents was not a matter of strength but a matter of law. The gray-haired man leaned forward at last. His calm smile had faded. He asked Sam what he wanted. Did he wish to drag this matter into court, creating trouble for himself and others, or would he rather make an agreement and step aside peacefully? Sam shook his head. He told them clearly that he did not want an agreement. He wanted only what was right. The ranch was his by law and by history, and he would not leave. If they wished to bring the matter into court, he was ready. He lifted the folder slightly and said he had every piece of proof needed to show the truth. The group grew restless. The woman closed her folder, the younger man tapped his clipboard nervously, and the assistants avoided Sam's eyes. The gray-haired man finally stood up. He looked across the ranch, at the barn and the fields, and then back at Sam. His face was no longer smooth but stern. He told Sam they would not give up easily. He promised that the association would pursue every path available. Then he turned, and the group walked back to their cars. Sam watched them leave, the dust rising again on the road. He felt a deep breath fill his chest. He had faced them with proof, and though they had not admitted defeat, he had seen the doubt in their faces. They now knew that he was not an easy target. That evening, Sam sat at the porch once more. The folder rested on the table beside him. He thought about what had just happened. The confrontation had been tense, but it had also shown him something important. The association's strength was not built on truth. It was built on papers filled with errors and borders drawn in secret. When faced with real history, they had no solid answer. Sam also realized that the fight was not yet over. The gray-haired man's words had carried a promise of further action. There might be court hearings, letters, or more visits. But Sam was no longer uncertain. He had seen his own strength in standing calmly, presenting proof, and refusing fear. The ranch glowed in the setting sun. The oak tree near the barn stood tall, as it had for generations. Sam thought of his great-grandfather building the first cabin, his grandfather planting trees, and his father repairing fences. Each one had left behind more than work. They had left behind courage. Sam told himself quietly that courage was not the absence of challenges but the way one faced them. He had faced the association and shown them the truth. The road ahead might still be long, but he was ready to walk it. As the stars filled the night sky, Sam closed the folder and placed it carefully back in the wooden box. He looked across the ranch one more time and whispered to himself that it would remain in his hands. Whatever came next, he was prepared. The confrontation had ended, but the larger battle was still waiting. The days after the confrontation passed slowly but firmly for Sam. He continued his work on the ranch as always, but each day carried the feeling of a storm waiting on the horizon. The words of the gray-haired man stayed in his mind. The association had promised to take further action, and Sam knew they meant it. But fear no longer lived in him. Instead, he felt steady, ready to protect his home with truth and proof. One morning, a new letter arrived in his mailbox. It was longer and more official looking than the first. This time, the association claimed they had filed a legal notice to challenge his ownership in court. They demanded once again that he step aside, but now the words carried a threat of formal action. Sam read it carefully, folded it, and placed it beside the old deed. He did not let his hands shake, for he knew he had nothing to hide. That same day, Sam returned to the county office with his folder. He spoke again with the senior clerk, who read the association's new notice with sharp eyes. She shook her head and told Sam not to worry. She explained that the court process would require both sides to show proof. Since Sam had the original deed and a long chain of records, the truth would speak clearly. She even offered to help him prepare the files in order. Her steady support gave Sam fresh confidence. Over the next week, Sam worked both on the ranch and on his documents. In the mornings, he carried hay, fixed fences, and cared for the animals. In the afternoons, he sat at the kitchen table, reviewing maps, deeds, and notes. He made sure everything was organized, with copies ready to be shown. The folder grew heavier each day, not from the weight of the papers but from the strength of his preparation. When the hearing day arrived, Sam rode into town early. The courthouse stood tall with stone walls and wide steps. People walked in and out, carrying papers and speaking in hushed voices. Sam walked firmly through the doors, his folder held close. Inside the courtroom, he saw the gray-haired man and the other association representatives seated together. They looked confident, whispering among themselves. But Sam noticed something else in their faces, a shadow of unease, the same unease he had seen on his porch when their false papers had been exposed. The judge entered, and the room grew quiet. The hearing began with the association's lawyer presenting their claim. He spoke loudly about the new boundaries and the transfer forms. He showed the altered map and the suspicious documents. But as he spoke, Sam noticed how the papers looked weak under the bright light of the courtroom. The errors that had seemed small before now appeared larger. When it was Sam's turn, he stood slowly and opened his folder. He began with the deed, holding it carefully as he spoke. His voice was calm, steady, and clear. He told the story of his great-grandfather who had bought the land and signed the first deed. He explained how the land had passed through each generation. He laid the maps on the table, showing the clear difference between the original borders and the altered ones. He pointed to the missing signatures, the false dates, and the mistakes in the association's filings. As Sam spoke, the courtroom grew quieter. Each word carried the weight of history, and each paper carried the strength of truth. Even the judge leaned forward to study the documents more closely. The association's lawyer shifted uncomfortably, while the gray-haired man crossed his arms and looked away. When Sam finished, he closed his folder and stepped back. He had not raised his voice, but his calm firmness filled the room more strongly than any loud speech. He had simply told the truth. The judge took time to review everything. At last, he looked up and gave his decision. He declared that the association's claim was invalid. The altered maps and false forms could not stand against the original deed and the long history of clear ownership. He ruled that the ranch belonged fully and lawfully to Sam, just as it had for the past 120 years. The courtroom was silent for a moment, then the sound of the gavel struck firmly. The case was closed. The association's representatives gathered their papers quickly, their faces tight with defeat. The gray-haired man glanced at Sam one last time, but there was no power in his eyes now. Without a word, they left the courtroom. Sam stood quietly, letting the relief wash over him. He felt no need to cheer or shout. The victory was not only his but also his family's. He thought of his great-grandfather, his grandfather, and his father, each one who had worked this land. Their legacy had stood against the test, and now it was safe once more. When Sam returned to the ranch that evening, the fields seemed brighter than before. The animals moved calmly, the windmill turned slowly, and the oak tree swayed in the soft wind. Sam walked across the yard with a light step. He placed the folder back in the wooden box and set it gently beside the old deeds. He sat on the porch and watched the sunset spread across the land. The colors painted the sky with peace, as if the ranch itself was celebrating the justice that had been done. Sam thought of his neighbors, who would be glad to hear that the ranch was safe. He thought of future generations, who would one day walk this same land, free from the shadow of false claims. That night, the stars filled the sky, and Sam leaned back in his chair with quiet satisfaction. The fight had been hard, but it had been worth every step. The ranch was not only land. It was memory, history, and the heart of his family. And now it would remain untouched for years to come. Sam whispered softly to himself that justice had been served. The ranch was safe. His family's story continued, written not only in old papers but also in courage, truth, and faith. And as long as he lived, Sam would guard it, just as those before him had done.